Now, we're next going to talk about an issue that we have discussed a lot on Breakfast in recent weeks, and this is calls for the introduction of graduated driving licences to help minimise the risk to young drivers and novice drivers.
It follows a campaign by families who've lost loved ones in crashes. It also has the backing of the AA, and it's something which driving instructor Kevin Dias also supports, as Philip Norton explains.
Your first wheels can be fun, but for young drivers it can often end in serious injury or death. If not for them, for passengers or others on the road.
Serious RTC.
Kevin Dias is a driving instructor and also the chair of Grimsby Instructors Association. He wants to see tougher restrictions on new drivers to lower casualty numbers.
I think we need to re-look at what we do for younger drivers, because they are younger. A bit of the brain that deals with risk is towards the front. Our brains develop from the back, so it is the last part of the brain that actually begins or finishes developing.
Government figures show a fifth of all fatal or serious injury crashes involved a young driver, with those aged between 17 to 24 4 times as likely to be killed or seriously injured as those over 25. Kevin's had a personal experience with one of his students.
There was a lad that I took for about 5 or 6 lessons. Even at that time, could I recognise an underestimating of risk? He did go on to have the crash. He survived it. He was left seriously injured for quite some time, but it killed his female passenger.
Your mate's more likely to crash with passengers in the car.
One idea he embraces is a graduated driving licence for young drivers, which could see restrictions on things like passenger numbers and driving at night.
For the night is a different beast.
I think it's a good idea because they take their lessons, they pass their tests and they're driving nicely, and the minute past their tests, well, they're young.
You've got your test next week. How would you feel if you couldn't take passengers straight after it?
For me personally, it wouldn't bother me that much. I'd only be commuting to and from work and maybe going to my mates here and there, so it wouldn't really bother me that much, but it differs from person to person.
Government needs to take a hand on this and think we need to do something different here. We need to look at these graduated licences. They work in lots of other countries. Let's find one that works for us and go forward with it and lead something here.
The government currently says it has no plans to introduce a graduated licence, but says it's researching support for young drivers.
Boys, chill out back there.
And targeting them in road safety campaigns. Philip Norton, BBC News.
Let the mate concentrate.
Well, we're joined now by driving instructor Sue Papworth. Sue, this has become a really important discussion around graduated driving licences. It really seems to be gathering momentum. However, I know that you don't feel it's the complete answer, do you? Can you explain why?
I'm very concerned about 17-year-olds predominantly being in a car alone by themselves, making all the decisions. But I find it hard to believe that it's going to be policed and enforced, because there's so much for them to learn after they've passed their tests. Country bends, night driving, their attitude, the weather, and also passengers in the car. There's so many issues there to be addressed yes, we do have to consider carefully whether we should put 17-year-olds on the road alone in a car, expecting them to deal with all of those issues. But I think regarding a graduated driving licence, there needs to be further training implemented. And are we delaying things that might happen from when they're 18, 19, having been supervised, to maybe when they're 20 to 25? Are we just delaying the issues?
So for
it's
you,
a very emotional subject.
Of course it is, no, and we appreciate that. But I understand you're coming from years of experience as well in this field. So for you, it's much more to do with time spent behind the wheel, exposure to different driving environments, perhaps really what's required for people to learn during their time training and also be tested on before they're actually past fit to drive.
I think there's a lot of anxiety around learning to drive at the moment, predominantly because we've got a wait time for a driving test of 6 months, during which time many people can't afford weekly lessons. There are people that can't afford to have a private practice. And so what I'm finding is with the wait time for tests certainly in the Cambridge area until October, people are not taking regular lessons and therefore not getting the experience behind the wheel of a car, being supervised either by somebody like myself, a driving instructor, or possibly by a parent to give them that experience, which I can't give them. I can give them knowledge and understanding, but actually they need a lot more experience before they drive alone in the car, making decisions based on what they see and what they hear.
There are other countries, Sue, aren't there, where people have to wait longer, have to have that more experience before they're actually allowed to go out and drive on their own? Are there lessons that, other examples from other places that you're aware of that maybe we could take bits from?
Yes, there are. There are bits we can take. My concern is if we were to take a pupil on, for example, for a year, and they were to stay with me to give them the experience, during a pupil learning during the summer months is going to find it hard to experience night driving, for example. During the evenings in the winter, we've been dealing with not only adverse weather, but the state of the roads and the potholes has made it incredibly difficult for us to conduct lessons at night safely without damage to our vehicles.
So, potholes is a really interesting.
Yeah.
One of my children's having driving lessons at the moment, and what do you do with a pothole? You know, because understandably, a driving instructor wouldn't want you to drive through it because the car is their livelihood. But if you were taking your test and you drive round a pothole, I don't know. Do you get penalised for doing that? I don't know.
The test, 35, 40 minutes of driving on your driving test shouldn't be any different to what you would be doing normally during your lessons or afterwards. There are too many people that are test focused. The test is such a short time to demonstrate to somebody that you can drive safely, assessing risk. So the risk assessment of hitting a pothole can be quite severe and damaging to the car.
So, Sue, from what you're saying, would you prefer to see young people, novice drivers, have a certain target for either time spent behind the wheel? I don't know how you log that unless it's through official lessons, or a minimum number of lessons with a qualified instructor before they're allowed to take their test? Because obviously you'll know that there are cost implications to that.
That's the problem. There are cost implications. I'm very fortunate where I live in that the majority of my pupils have access to a car outside of lessons. And I actively encourage the parents to be on board with me to encourage their child, because most of them are under 18, to drive as many different places as they can and experience as much on-road and behind the wheel driving to give them that experience before they're alone in the car. But I appreciate that that's not available to everybody. I live very rurally. My mother still lives on the farm, and I'm able to, along with my family, encourage my pupils to sit in a combine harvester, to sit in a tractor, to look at the difficulty in driving the rural roads and the bends, the adverse weather. But that's not available to everybody.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I remember the old adage when I learned many, many, many years ago, they said the driving instructor teaches you to pass your test, and then you actually only really learn to drive when you start driving, but the roads were very different back then. Sue Papworth, thanks so much for talking to us.